The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix was a Formula One motor race held on 1 May 1994 at the Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari, located in Imola, Italy. It was the third race of the 1994 Formula One season. Tragic events at this race proved to be a major turning point in both the 1994 season, and in the development of Formula One itself, particularly with regard to safety. Other incidents saw driver Rubens Barrichello injured and several mechanics and spectators injured. In terms of driver fatalities, this was Formula One's darkest weekend since two drivers were killed at the 1960 Belgian Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher, driving for Benetton, won the race despite contact with Damon Hill. Nicola Larini, driving for Ferrari, scored the first points of his career when he achieved a podium finish in second position. Mika Häkkinen finished third in a McLaren. The race led to an increased emphasis on safety in the sport as well as the reforming of the Grand Prix Drivers Association after a 12-year hiatus, and the changing of many track layouts and car designs. Since the race, numerous regulation changes have been made to slow Formula One cars down, and new circuits incorporate large runoff areas to slow cars before they collide with a wall. Senna was given a state funeral in his hometown of São Paulo, Brazil, where around 500,000 people lined the streets to watch the coffin pass. Italian prosecutors charged 6 people with manslaughter in connection with Senna's death, all of whom were later acquitted. The case took more than 11 years to conclude due to an appeal and a retrial following the original verdict of not guilty. As a result of increased standards in safety following this race, there was a 20-year gap between the deaths of Ratzenberger and Senna, and the crash of Jules Bianchi at the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix, which led to his death a year later. Report. Background. Heading into the third round of the season, Benetton driver Michael Schumacher was leading the World Drivers' Championship with 20 points. Jordan driver Rubens Barrichello was second on 7 points, 13 points behind Schumacher. Behind Schumacher and Barrichello was Damon Hill in third place on 6 points, tied on points with Ferrari driver Gerhard Berger. Berger's teammate Jean Elisa was fifth on 4 points. In the World Constructors' Championship, Benetton were leading on 20 points and Ferrari were second on 10 points, with Jordan third on 7 points. There were 2 driver changes heading into the race. JJ Lehto replaced Jos Verstappen at Benetton, the latter having replaced Lehto for the opening 2 races of the season due to an injury sustained by Lehto in pre-season testing. Aguri Suzuki was replaced with Andrea de Cesaris at Jordan. Qualifying drivers had 2 hours, split over 2 days, Friday and Saturday, to register the fastest possible time. The driver who could register the fastest time would start on pole position, giving them a head start of 8 meters over the second fastest driver, who started on the opposite side of the track. Third place would start 8 meters behind the second fastest driver and on the side of the track where the first-placed car is. This practice continues until 26th place, and the 27th and 28th placed cars are not allowed to race. Friday qualifying. On Friday the 29th of April, during the first qualifying session to determine the starting order for the race, Rubens Barrichello, a driver for Jordan, hit a curb at the variant Bassa corner at 140 miles per hour, launching him into the air. He hit the top of the tire barrier, and was knocked unconscious. His car rolled several times after landing before coming to rest upside down. Medical teams treated him at the crash site, and he was taken to the circuit's medical center before being transferred to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna by helicopter for routine tests and observation to be carried out. He returned to the race meeting the next day, although his broken nose and a plaster cast on his arm forced him to sit out the rest of the race weekend. 10 years after the incident, Damon Hill, who drove for the Williams-Renault team at the time, described the feeling after the crash. We all brushed ourselves off and carried on qualifying, reassured that our cars were tough as tanks and we could be shaken but not hurt, despite a spin. Senna's teammate Damon Hill was 7th, having spun himself over 1.6 seconds behind Senna. Saturday qualifying 20 minutes into the final qualifying session, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger failed to negotiate the Villeneuve curve in his Simtek. He subsequently hit the opposing concrete barrier wall, almost head-on, and was critically injured. Although the survival cell remained largely intact, the force of the impact inflicted a basal skull fracture. Ratzenberger, in his first season as a Formula One driver, had run over a curb at the Acca Minerale chicane on his previous lap, the impact of which is believed to have damaged his front wing. Rather than return to the pit lane, he continued on another fast lap. Traveling at 190 miles per hour, his car suffered a front wing failure, leaving him unable to control it. The session was stopped while doctors attended to Ratzenberger. After initially being taken by ambulance to the on-circuit medical center, he was airlifted to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna shortly after, the second driver to be admitted there during the weekend. The session was restarted approximately 25 minutes later, but several teams, including Williams and Benetton, took no further part. Later in hospital, it was announced that Ratzenberger had died as a result of his multiple injuries. His death marked the first Formula One race weekend fatality since the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix, when Riccardo Pallotti was killed. It had been 8 years since Elio De Angelis died testing a Brabham car at the circuit. Paul Ricard, Professor Sid Watkins, then head of the Formula One on-track medical team, recalled in his memoirs Ayrton Senna's reaction to the news, stating that, "Ayrton broke down and cried on my shoulder." Watkins tried to persuade Senna not to race the following day, asking, "What else do you need to do? You have been world champion 3 times, you are obviously the quickest driver. Give it up and let's go fishing." Senna replied, "Sid, there are certain things over which we have no control. I cannot quit, I have to go on." Senna had qualified on pole position, having not set a lap time following Ratzenberger's death. He was joined on the front row by Schumacher, and Berger qualified in 3rd. Damon Hill was able to improve on his disastrous Friday session before the red flag, improving his time by 1 second and qualifying 4th as a result. A time posted by Ratzenberger before his fatal crash would have been sufficient for entry into the race, starting from the 26th and final position on the grid. Paul Belmondo and Barrichello did not qualify. Race first start. The race took place in the afternoon from 1400 local time, in dry and sunny weather. At the start of the race, J.J. Leto stalled his Benetton on the grid. Pedro Lamy, starting from further back on the grid, had his view of the stationary Benetton blocked by other cars and hit the back of Leto's car, causing bodywork in tires to fly into the air. Parts of the car went over the safety fencing designed to protect spectators at the start line, causing minor injuries to 9 people. Further back, Martin Brundle had a good start, overtaking 2 cars as well as Leto, propelling him from 13th to 10th place. The incident between Leto and Lamy caused the safety car to be deployed, with all the remaining competitors holding position behind it while traveling at a reduced speed. During this period, as a result of traveling at slower speeds, tire temperatures dropped. At the driver's briefing before the race, Senna, along with Gerhard Berger, had expressed concern that the safety car did not go fast enough to keep tire temperatures high. Senna was also worried by a procedure introduced at the 1994 Pacific Grand Prix, which was that the safety car would lead the grid on the formation lap, rather than letting the race leader choose the pace of the formation lap. The procedure was removed for this race. Once the track was reported clear of debris, the safety car was withdrawn and the race restarted with a rolling start. Jonathan Palmer, commentating alongside Murray Walker for the BBC, remarked how quick Schumacher was. as his time in the warm-up session on Sunday morning gave rise to speculation that he was going to make one pit stop and, therefore, race with a heavier car than Senna, who was planning to make two, as was conventional. Martin Brundle had told BBC presenter Steve Ryder that McLaren were going to make two stops on the second lap after the restart, with Ayrton Senna leading Michael Schumacher. Senna's car left the road at the Tamburello corner, and after slowing from 190 miles per hour to 131 miles per hour, hit the concrete wall, with debris flying into the path of the other drivers. At 14:17 local time, a red flag was shown to indicate the race was stopped, and FIA race doctor Sid Watkins arrived at the scene to treat Senna. When a race is stopped under a red flag, cars must slow down and make their way back to the pit lane or starting grid unless notified of a restart. This protects race marshals and medical staff at the crash scene, and allows easier access for medical cars to the incident. Approximately 10 minutes after Senna's crash, the Larousse team mistakenly allowed one of their drivers, Eric Comas, to leave the pits despite the circuit being closed under red flags. Marshals frantically waved him down as he approached the scene of the accident, traveling at pretty much full speed. Eurosport commentator John Watson described the incident as the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen at any time in my life. Comas avoided hitting any of the people or cars that were on the circuit, but after going over towards Senna's accident scene, he was so distressed at what he saw that he withdrew from the race. The pictures shown on the world feed of Senna being treated were considered by the BBC to be too graphic, disturbing and upsetting for general viewing at the time, and the BBC abandoned RAI's world feed to focus on their own camera in the pit lane. BBC commentator Murray Walker has frequently talked about how upsetting it was to have to talk to viewers whilst attempting to avoid any and all mention of the distressing images shown on RAI, referring to the number of times the incident was replayed on the world feed. Ferrari team principal John Todt stated that, even if you didn't want to watch it, you could barely fail to. Senna was lifted from the wrecked Williams, and after approximately 15 minutes of on-site medical attention, was airlifted directly to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna, becoming the third and final driver to be admitted there during the weekend. Medical teams continued to treat him during the flight. 37 minutes after the crash, at 2:55 p.m. local time, the race was restarted. Second start regulations meant that the original sixth lap would be deleted and the race would be restarted from the beginning of said lap. The first 5 laps would be added to the second part of the race and the overall result would be decided on aggregate. The race ran to a total of 58 laps, 5 from the first section and 53 from the second section. On the second formation lap, Heinz-Harald Frentzen stalled his Sauber whilst attempting to leave the grid and was forced to start from the pit lane. The other cars started from the grid in the order they were at the point the race was stopped. Michael Schumacher had a poor start and Gerhard Berger took the lead on track. Hill, from third, made contact attempting to overtake Schumacher at the Tosa corner, dropping Hill to the back of the field and was forced to make a pit stop in order to fit a new nose cone. Hill battled back to finish in 6th position. A very fast Schumacher took the lead on track on lap 12 when Berger ran wide, before relinquishing the race lead overall to Berger when he made his first pit stop, confirming that his pace both before and after the red flag was down to him running a 3-stop strategy, therefore racing with a lighter car. Berger pitted at the end of lap 15 for his first of 2 scheduled stops, before retiring a lap later with handling problems. Häkkinen led his first ever laps of a Formula One World Championship race, before pitting at the end of lap 18. Following the first series of pit stops, Schumacher resumed the race lead. Schumacher's extra pace as a result of his lighter fuel loads meant he was able to pull out enough of a gap to Häkkinen which enabled him to make an extra pit stop. Häkkönen's pace was very slow, allowing Nicola Larini to leapfrog him when the second round of pit stops were made. On lap 48, Michele Alboreto came in for a pit stop, but as he left, the rear right wheel came loose from the Minardi as it left the pit lane, striking two Ferrari and two Lotus mechanics, who were left needing hospital treatment. Towards the end of the race, all eyes were on the battle for third place, as Häkkönen's pace was so slow that Karl Wendlinger was catching him in the Sauber, aiming to give Sauber their first podium finish. However, Häkkönen was able to resist Wendlinger's challenge and finish in third place, with Wendlinger fourth. Ukyo Katayama finished fifth for Tyrrell, and Hill was able to battle back to finish sixth, the last of the points scorers. Michael Schumacher won the race ahead of Larini and Häkkinen, giving him a maximum 30 points after 3 rounds of the 1994 Formula One season. It was the only podium finish of Larini's career, and the first of just 2 occasions when he scored World Championship points. Karl Wendlinger rode back to the pits on Häkkinen's McLaren after Wendlinger's car broke down on the slowing down lap. At the podium ceremony, out of respect for Roland Ratzenberger, who had died the day before, no champagne was sprayed. Post-race in the press conference following the race, Schumacher said that he couldn't feel satisfied, couldn't feel happy with his win following the events that had occurred during the race weekend. 2 hours and 20 minutes after Schumacher crossed the finish line, at 6:40 p.m. local time, Dr. Maria Teresa Fiandri announced that Ayrton Senna had died. The official time of death was given, however, as 2:17 p.m. local time, meaning that Senna had been killed instantly. The autopsy recorded the cause of death as head injuries likely caused by an impact from a wheel and suspension. BBC television commentator Murray Walker described it as the blackest day for Grand Prix racing that I can remember. Some time later, Bob Jenkins of NASCAR on ESPN relayed the news of Senna's death to American viewers during the 1994 Winston Select 500 at Talladega Superspeedway, just as the drivers were coming to the restart. Dale Earnhardt, who won that race, dedicated his win to Senna. Also, CNN announced the news of Senna's death. On the 3rd of May, the FIA called a meeting at the request of the Italian Automobile Club to review the events of the weekend. Later on, the governing body announced new safety measures for the next round in Monaco, which included the entry and exit of the pit lane to be controlled by a curve to force cars to run at a reduced speed. No team mechanic would be allowed onto the pit lane surface except for pit stops, and a draw would be arranged to determine the order in which cars make pit stops and be limited to emergencies, with cars not taking on new tires or allowed to refuel. Senna was given a state funeral in São Paulo, Brazil on 5 May 1994. Approximately 500,000 people lined the streets to watch the coffin pass. Senna's rival Alain Prost was among the pallbearers. The majority of the Formula One community attended Senna's funeral. However, the president of the sport's governing body, the FIA, Max Mosley, attended the funeral of Ratzenberger instead, which took place on 7 May 1994 in Salzburg, Austria. Mosley said in a press conference 10 years later, "I went to his funeral because everyone went to Senna's. I thought it was important that somebody went to his." The 1994 Imola layout, which had been in place since 1981, was never again used for a Formula One race. The circuit was heavily modified following the race, including a change at Tamborello, also the scene of major accidents for Gerhard Berger and Nelson Piquet, from a high-speed corner to a much slower chicane. The FIA also changed the regulations governing Formula One car design, to the extent that the 1995 regulations required all teams to create completely new designs, as their 1994 cars could not be adapted to them. The concern raised at the drivers' briefing the morning of the race by Senna and Berger would lead to the Grand Prix Drivers Association reforming at the following race. The 1994 Monaco Grand Prix. The GPDA, which was originally founded in 1961, had previously disbanded in 1982. The primary purpose of its reforming was to allow drivers to discuss safety issues with a view to improve standards following the incidents at Imola. The front two grid slots at the Monaco Grand Prix that year, which were painted with Brazilian and Austrian flags, were left clear in memory of the two drivers who had lost their lives, while both Williams and Simtek entered only one car each. Additionally, a minute of silence was observed before the race. In October 1996, FIA set about researching a driver restraint system for head-on impacts, in conjunction with McLaren and Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes contacted the makers of the Hans device, with a view to adapting it for Formula One. The Hans device was first released in 1991 and was designed to restrain the head and neck in the event of an accident to avoid basal skull fracture, the injury which killed Ratzenberger. Initial tests proved successful, and at the 2000 San Marino Grand Prix the final report was released which concluded that the Hans should be recommended for use. Its use was made compulsory from the start of the 2003 season. Senna was the last driver for 20 years to die in a Formula One accident, until the death of Jules Bianchi in 2015 from injuries sustained at the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix. However, 3 trackside marshals were killed during those years as a direct result of such crashes. Paolo Gheslimberti at the 2000 Italian Grand Prix, Graham Beveridge at the 2001 Australian Grand Prix and Mark Robinson at the 2013 Canadian Grand Prix. To date, this is the last time that an Italian driver scored a point for Ferrari.